Barry Tramel, Oklahoman, joins us on 365 Sports, covering, the state of Oklahoma, OU, and Oklahoma State with Craig and Paul. I'm David Smoak. Barry, thanks for your time. I want to start with, if you don't mind, Oklahoma State, 19 transfers today. We know the story about Derek Mason. What's going on in Stillwater right now?
Well, it's a lot of upheaval, a lot of drama, a lot of dissatisfaction. Don't know the root of it necessarily, but it's got to be alarming for a guy that prides himself on building a good culture, which is what Mike Gundy has always done. It's very disconcerting because it's not, it's one thing. Almost every team loses a batch of players in the portal, but you rarely lose 7-8 starters to the portal, which is what Oklahoma State has done. So, everybody's going to lose seniors, going to lose guys going to the pros early, that kind of thing. That's just sort of the natural progression. But when you lose guys who just want to go someplace else, that's alarming. So Cowboys are sort of staggering right now and trying to find their footing, I would say.
Barry, Mike Gundy has always seemed to me from the outside like a guy who, in the modern era of college football, wouldn't really like the way that it's gone, because he is someone who has done a very good job, like you said, of building the culture of Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State. And there's a lot of outside factors that are completely out of his control that, would really hurt that. Do you think he would ever just be over it and leave?
Yeah, I think there's a point in time. I don't think he wants to, but you're sort of right in that I don't know that the modern structure of college football, with portal, with the NIL, with all those things, with players having quite a bit of power, that's really not his style. He's not into that. Now, he's got two options. He's got three options. He can get over that dislike and make the best of it, or he can ignore it and, the results will take care of themselves. Or he could just say, you know what, I don't want to do this. And you know what, he wouldn't be the worst coach or the best coach that's made that decision. We've seen that in college basketball. Jay Wright is as classy as of a guy as there is, has built as good of a program as there is in college basketball. And he walked away last year. And, it's probably a number of reasons, but I think one of them is, I just don't really want to coach in this kind of culture. So I think that's what's going on. Gundy's going to have some decisions to make for himself.
Barry, how surprising was the Derek Mason announcement?
It wasn't terribly surprising. The only surprise was that he was the first coach to be let go or to move down the road, because we knew there was some friction going on with the defense. The defense was actually halfway good, considering what they lost from that great defense of 21. The OSU defense sort of held up its end of the bargain. It was the OSU offense that bottomed out. You guys there at Baylor saw a pretty good OSU team there early October. Cowboys were pretty good at that point. But by the end of the season, the offense was terrible, probably the second worst in the Big 12. And you can't win in Stillwater with that bad of an offense. So we expected big changes on the offensive front, and instead we see it first on the defensive side.
Barry, in the last couple of years, you saw Oklahoma State, Baylor play for the Big 12 title. This year, TCU and Kansas State. I know it didn't end well for TCU, but they did have the win against Michigan. It didn't end well for K-State against Alabama, but they had a win against TCU. Your thoughts about the conference? It appears, don't you think, that there's all the talk and chatter that there's 1 year left with Texas OU and then everyone moves on?
Yeah, it looks that way. We're in a period of incredible parity. In the last 3 seasons, we've had 6 schools make the Big 12 title game. We've had 3 different schools win the Big 12 title game. We've had 3 different schools win the Big 12 regular season. And we've had, let's count them up. TCU, Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Oklahoma, Baylor, Kansas. We've had, in the last 3 years, we've had 6 schools either finish first in the standings or win the Big 12 title game. That's remarkable parity. Mm-hmm. So it's fun football. It doesn't make for outstanding chance to win the national championship, but you know what? It produced a finalist for the first time in the playoff era. So I think Big 12 football is in pretty good shape. Now, you know what? Big 12 doesn't match up to Georgia. Big 12 probably doesn't match up to Alabama. But Big 12 matched up with Michigan, and I don't see anybody else matching up with Georgia and Alabama on a consistent basis. So I, as opposed to, say, 18 months ago, I really like where Big 12 football is.
Barry, for Oklahoma in particular, as they transition in their last year or, two, if it all fell apart in the tide changes on them leaving after 1 year, but in their last year here in the Big 12 before they go into the SEC, how important is it for Brent Venables to build some momentum going out the door, or are we on the outside looking at the assessment of this past year wrong?
Oh, I think people are looking at the assessment of this past year incorrectly. But I think they looked at the assessment of the program going into the Venables year incorrectly. Lincoln Riley did not lead. He went 11-2 in his last year. He went 10-2, 12-2, or 11-2 every year he was in Norman. But the truth is, they weren't an 11-2 team. They went 6-1 in close games, one possession games. That's not sustainable, and we saw it swing the other way. Brent Venables went 0-4. The truth is, OU football has declined in the last 3-4 years. This is really a program that's about an 8-4 program right now in terms of talent. They're not as good as they were in 2017 when Bob Stoops handed the reins to Lincoln. It's not destitute. It's still really good compared to most Big 12 programs, but it's not the elite level to which they're accustomed. So he's not rebuilding from depth. Really not a 6-7 team. We saw that in the bowl game against Florida State. Florida State finished, 11th or 12th in the country. Had an exceptional year. Didn't have any opt-outs in the Cheez-It Bowl. OU had a few opt-outs and some injuries, and yet took Florida State to the wire. So Oklahoma's in pretty good shape by Big 12 standards. Now, they were always going to have some issues moving up with the SEC, and that's not because you meet a really good team every week. It's because you're eventually going to run into Georgia or Alabama, and then what are you going to do? So I think Oklahoma football is fine as long as they realize they're a long ways from the Crimson Tide or the Bulldogs.
Barry, circling back to Oklahoma State, what's going on with Spencer Sanders? What's the story as far as why he is not either firmly planted still in Stillwater or why he is not one of those mini quarterbacks that has now found the new home?
Well, the story on the street is he was asking for too much money in the NIL, which was probably a bad marketing ploy on his part. However, if you're the last quarterback standing, and by far the best quarterback standing, then all of a sudden it's back to being, a seller's market. So, the two schools most mentioned still needing a quarterback are Ole Miss and Auburn. And if Sanders can get those two guys into a bidding war, maybe he gets the money he wanted. I like Spencer. I'll be pulling for him. I hope it goes well. I wish he would have stayed. I don't blame him for going. I sort of hope he goes to Ole Miss because I think they're less crazy than the people at Auburn. But it's all relative. But
sure.
that's sort of my synopsis of Spencer Sanders. I don't know what's going on. He's a really good quarterback at Oklahoma State. He didn't get enough good blocking. The OSU offensive line's been a mess for 2 or 3 straight years. Baylor just tore Oklahoma State up in that Big 12 title game, and somehow they scratched out a way to have a chance to win. But until OSU gets some blocking, it doesn't matter. John Elway's their quarterback. So I think that's the quick version of Spencer Sanders.
Was there anything with him and Gundy, or is it just he wanted money and Stillwater wasn't a place to get it?
No, you hear stories about him and Gundy and him and the coordinator and him and the receivers. I don't know what to believe. I actually don't believe much of any of it. It might be true, but I'm not going to believe it. The truth of the matter is we live in a time of college football when everybody is restless and everybody is transient and people like to move. And that's not an indictment of college football. It's not even an indictment of sports. That's just the way American society is. I mean, on every level of sports, you see people jumping teams, whether it's the pros, now colleges, high schools. I mean, I assume it's in Texas. It's the same way in Oklahoma. Got all kinds of kids switching high schools every year. And you see it on the youth level. I got a 13-year-old granddaughter who plays softball on the travel ball. There's always girls jumping from one team to another. It's just the way society is. You know, if we hire some really good writer from Missouri or New York or wherever, if we keep them 2 years, we consider it lucky because they get antsy and ready to move. It's just sort of the spirit of the age. I think college football fans are going to have to adjust and just realize that's the way it is.
Barry, you know, it is, you know, I'm 63 years old, and I've kind of had to learn a little bit about some of the new things. And at times, there's a part of me that tugs me to the past of when it seemed to be innocent. But there was a lot of this going on even back then. It wasn't as well known until somebody was investigated and put on probation. It's okay, right? I mean, college football's ratings, their numbers are massive right now.
I lost you for a minute. What was the last part?
College football seems to be fine no matter the changes or not. The numbers, the ratings are huge.
Yeah. Hey, listen, the games are great. I mean, yeah, we had a dud. Everybody's all worked up about the title game. Think back to the semifinals. We had two fabulous games. Look back to this Big 12 season. You didn't know who was going to win any game from week to week. I mean, TCU made the national championship, and they could have lost 4, 5, 6 games. So, Alabama played 4 games right down to the wire. They lost 2 of them. That's what happens when you go down to the wire. You win some, you lose some. We've reached a place of parity in college football. Now, it's not NFL parity. It's not anybody can win at parity. It's not, we'll never have a 65-7 game parity. But we've got much more equality than we used to have. I think it's a good move. You're right. People want to watch. People like to cheer. The game is financially healthy, unless you're crazy enough you want to go spend $1 million on some kid through NIL. I mean, if that's where you want to spend your money, knock yourself out. But otherwise, financially, it's healthy. The only thing we're doing is we're paying football coaches way too much money, but at least they're now starting to earn their money by having to monitor their rosters year round. So you're right. It's never been more popular. The only games people are going to watch are the ones they put on TV. So, you know, it's like the old Seinfeld act when Jerry and George were going to get a deal on NBC and George comes up with a show about nothing, and Jerry says, "Why would we watch?" And George says, "Because it's on TV. Why are people going to watch this college football game? This Rice Southern Miss bowl game because it's on TV, and they're going to watch."
Barry, as always, love it from your perspective. Thanks for your time. We appreciate you being on today's show.
You bet. See you later.
Barry Tramel, the Oklahoman who covers the state.